And that frustration is starting to show up in the comments, in the hashtags, and in the trending conversations. Now let's connect the dots with Martell Holt and Ariane Curry, because believe me, this is where things get even messier. Martell's ongoing drama with Ariane is not just personal, it's public. It plays out on social media, in interviews, and even indirectly on the show. But notice how instead of letting Martell carry that weight himself, the conversation somehow always gets pulled back to Melody, as if she's responsible for his choices, as if she's the one who needs to answer for his mistakes. That's not fair, and fans are calling it out. And let's not forget, Melody has never needed to weaponize Martell's drama for her own storylines. She lives her truth. She shows her kids, her businesses, her music, her faith, her friendships. Meanwhile, Martell continues to spiral. And instead of addressing his accountability head-on, the cast and sometimes even the producers redirect back to Mel. And I have to say, if this isn't just a pattern, it's a crutch. Here's a hook for you. If the show is as strong as they claim it is, if the cast has so much going on, then why can't they carry storylines without looping Melody back in? Why is it that 5 years post-divorce, we're still being force-fed reheated nachos instead of something fresh? Think about that. Because here's the truth. Melody Shari has already shown us what moving on looks like. She's glowing, she's thriving, she's working. But the rest of the cast? They're still orbiting around her like she's the sun, and they can't find their own light. That's why fans are asking, are they truly mad at Mel? Or are they mad that without her, their storylines just don't hit the same? Stick with me, because in the next part we're going to dig even deeper into how the cast uses Melody as a distraction from their own struggles. Whether it's Marcia's business ventures, Kimmy's health battles, or Tisha's ongoing insecurities. And I promise you, by the time we connect all these dots, you'll see exactly why Mel remains the centerpiece, whether she wants to be or not. Now, let's peel back another layer. Because y'all know this story doesn't stop with Tisha's interview or even with the Scotts. We have to talk about Carlos King. Yes, the producer, the mastermind. The man who helped bring Love and Marriage, Huntsville, to life. Because if there's one thing Carlos knows, it's how to stir a pot just enough to keep the stew bubbling. And fans have been calling it out every time the ratings dip. Every time the storylines get stale, somehow Mel's name gets pulled back into the mix. It's almost like Carlos knows the formula. You say Melody Shari and suddenly the comments light up, the hashtags start trending, and the bloggers get to work. And while that may be great for TV drama, what it does in the long run is trap the cast in a cycle they can't escape. Instead of growing, evolving, or letting go of old narratives, they keep being pulled back into the same circle. And here's where Martell's current drama with Ariane Curry sneaks its way back into the spotlight. Because, let's be real, Martell had truly moved on. He'd built something stable and consistent outside of Melody. The cast would have had a new chapter to lean on. But instead, we keep circling back to the chaos. Ariane's cryptic posts, her interviews, her back and forth with fans at all keeps Martell tethered to the same old storyline. And because Martell is tied to it, the rest of the cast uses that as an excuse to keep mentioning Mel. But here's what fans are noticing, and I want y'all to think about this too. Melody doesn't need to mention them. She doesn't need to go live and talk about who said what, who did what, or who's still bitter. She shows up, she drops receipts when absolutely necessary, and then she goes right back to building her empire. Meanwhile, the rest of the cast seems stuck in reruns. That's why so many fans say Mel isn't just surviving, she's winning. She's showing what it looks like to move on, even when the people around you can't. And yet, here's the twist. The more she moves on, the more they pull her back in. Think about that. The less Melody participates in the drama, the more desperate the others seem to mention her name. It's almost like they need her as their storyline crutch. And if that's the case, then what does that say about their own marriages, their own businesses, their own personal growth? Here's where I want you to lean in, because this part is crucial. The obsession with Melody isn't really about Melody. It's about what she represents. She represents independence. She represents walking away from a toxic marriage and thriving anyway. She represents not needing validation from the cast or even from Carlos. And for some people, that's intimidating. For some people, it's easier to keep dragging her name than to face their own shortcomings. Now, I know y'all are ready for me to dig even deeper. Because the real tea is this. The cast isn't just reheating Mel's name out of habit. They're doing it because they know it works. They know fans will watch, bloggers will post, and conversations will swirl. But how long can that last before fans finally say enough is enough? Stick with me because in the next section we're going to get into the cracks showing in the Scots' own storylines. The double standards applied to Melody. And why the show might be setting itself up for a breaking point if this cycle doesn't change. Grab your tea because it's about to spill heavy. Want me to keep going in this same reality TV gossip style breakdown and build the next section around the Scots' crumbling storylines and the fan backlash? This is why fans are frustrated. Because instead of moving forward with new, fresh storylines about their own lives, their own marriages, and their own challenges, the cast keeps circling back to Melody and Martell like they're the only ones who ever mattered. And let's be honest, the fans are smart. They see the pattern. Every time the spotlight gets hot, every time accountability is needed, suddenly it's all about Melody again. Here's a hook for you. Why is it that whenever Mel tries to live her own life, build her businesses, raise her kids, and move on, she still ends up being the focal point of the cast's conversations? It almost feels like they can't function without her. They say the show doesn't need her. They say the show is fine without her. But then, in the very next breath, they bring her up again. Meanwhile, Melody is thriving with her music, her brand, her business ventures, her Forbes feature, and her growing fan base. She doesn't need to mention them at all, but somehow they can't stop mentioning her. That should tell you something. And let's not forget Kimmel.